And today, March 14th, 2022 in Hillsborough, North Carolina. So, are celebrating the anniversary of the passing from this world of Madhavendra Puri. And Madhavendra Puri's disciple was ostensibly the guru of the Lord, Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. So what I'm going to do first is just read through a series of verses, and then I'm going to go back and read the verses in the purports and talk about them. So this is from Chaitanya Charitamrita, Anjalila, chapter 9, I believe. No, chapter 8. And I'm going to be reading through, so this is Ancha 8. I'm going to read from 18 through 37. So I'm just first going to read through 18 through 37, and I want to do that in case reading through the purports we don't get through everything. Okay, text 18, just reading the translations. Formerly, when Madhavendra Puri was at the last stage of his life, Ramachandra Puri came to where he was staying. Madhavendra Puri was chanting the holy name of Krishna, and sometimes he would cry out, "Oh my Lord, I did not get shelter at Mathura." Then Ramachandra Puri was so foolish that he fearlessly dared to instruct his spiritual master. "If you are in full transcendental bliss," he said, "you should now remember only Brahman. Why are you crying?" Hearing this instruction, Madhavendra Puri, greatly angry, rebuked him by saying, "Get out, you sinful rascal." "Oh my Lord Krishna, I could not reach you, nor could I reach your abode, Mathura. I am dying in my unhappiness, and now this rascal has come to give me more pain. Don't show your face to me. Go anywhere else you like. If I die seeing your face, I shall not achieve the destination of my life. I am dying without achieving the shelter of Krishna, and therefore I am greatly unhappy. Now this condemned foolish rascal has come to instruct me about Brahman." Why don't we turn that off so it's not a distraction, if that's possible. Ramachandra Puri was thus denounced by Madhavendra Puri. Due to his offense, gradually material desire appeared within him. Thank you. One who is attached to dry speculative knowledge has no relationship with Krishna. His occupation is criticizing Vaishnavas. Thus he is situated in criticism. Ishwar Puri, the spiritual master of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, performed service to Madhavendra Puri. So this is contrasting these two disciples of Madhavendra Puri. Ramachandra Puri, who criticized him at the time he was passing from this world, and Ishwar Puri, who became again, ostensibly the guru of God, and how he served his guru. Ishwar Puri, the spiritual master of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, performed service to Madhavendra Puri, cleaning up his stool and urine with his own hand. Ishwar Puri was always chanting the holy name and pastimes of Lord Krishna for Madhavendra Puri to hear. In this way, he helped Madhavendra Puri remember the holy name and pastimes of Lord Krishna at the time of death. Pleased with Ishwar Puri, Madhavendra Puri embraced him and gave him the benediction that he would be a great devotee and lover of Krishna. Thus, Ishwar Puri became like an ocean of ecstatic love for Krishna, whereas Ramachandra Puri became a dry speculator and a critic of everyone else. Ishwar Puri received the blessing of Madhavendra Puri, whereas Ramachandra Puri received a rebuke from him. Therefore, these two persons, Ishwar Puri and Ramachandra Puri, are examples of the objects of a great personality's benediction and punishment. Madhavendra Puri instructed the entire world by presenting these two examples. His divine grace, Madhavendra Puri, the spiritual master of the entire world, thus distributed ecstatic love for Krishna. While passing away from the material world, he chanted the following verse. Let's read the Sanskrit for that. Aidina Dhanardra natehe maturanata kava valokya. Maturanata kara valokya. What is wrong with me today? I know what's wrong with me. I have been very stretched. Aidina dayardra natahe matura nata kara valokyashe ridayam twad alokakataram daita brahmyati kim karom yaham. O my Lord, O most merciful Master, O Master of Mathura, when shall I see you again? Because of my not seeing you, my agitated heart has become unsteady. O most beloved one, what shall I do now? In this verse, Madhavendra Puri teaches how to achieve ecstatic love for Krishna. By feeling separation from Krishna, one becomes spiritually situated. Madhavendra Puri sowed the seed of ecstatic love for Krishna within this material world and then departed. That seed later became a great tree in the form of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. I have incidentally described the passing away of Madhavendra Puri. Anyone who hears this must be considered very fortunate. So all of us have to leave this world. Yes, that is what they say, sure as death. The only two things that one is sure of is what? Death and taxes. Doesn't matter what the government is, they're going to tax you. And it doesn't matter how healthy you are. It doesn't matter how much you exercise and take vitamins or get plastic surgery. Everybody is going to give up this body. Yes, but how to give up the body? So this is a good instruction of how to leave this world. And it is also a good instruction, of course, as to the dealings between guru and disciple. So why is the way of leaving this world so important? So Krishna explains this in the Bhagavad Gita. Yam yam vapi sram bhavam tvajachante kalevaram tam tameva tikanteya saratad bhava bhavita. So our next destination is based on two things. It's based on how we've behaved in this life. Right? And people, more and more in the world, people are understanding that there's a law of karma. It's becoming, isn't it, more and more accepted, understanding that there's karma and reincarnation, that the body, the family, the situation I have in this life is due in large part to what I did in my previous lives, how I acted. But it's also what we think about at the time of death. And why that? Because I give this example many times, how I took the children on a field trip and one of the apartment buildings was burning down, what used to be called Flint Ridge, I don't know what it's called now. And one of the 8 apartment buildings was burning down, and the children said, what is that? Let's go see. What is the fire there? And when we went, this young woman, in her 20s probably, she was standing outside the apartment barefoot with her 3 children. Because when the fire started, she didn't grab her wallet, she didn't grab her, photographs. she just took her children. She didn't even grab her shoes. So the time of death is like that the body is falling apart. Our house is burning. The house we've lived in for however long we've lived in this body is burning down. And mentally, we try to grab on to whatever has been most important to us. It's a way of indicating what our real desires are. We may pretend to others and even pretend to ourselves what's really important to us. Oh, this is what's really important to me. This is what's really important to me. But if your house is burning down, then you see what's actually really important to you. And Krishna, right? Eko bahunam yo vidadanti kaman. Since the beginning of time, he's been fulfilling everyone's desire. The Lord is like a very indulgent parent. So what we desire, we get. And then there's a combination of our karmic activities and our desires. So at the time of one's passing from this world, if one thinks about one's house, one may take birth again to live in the house. But if you have very bad karma, you may live in the house as an insect, or you may live in the house as a dog or a cat or something like that. If you really attach to your family, Prabhupada tells the example of this very wealthy man who was, when he died, he was very attached to his village and his family, but he didn't have such good karma. So he took birth down the street from his grown-up sons and children and grandchildren, and he was a cobbler. He was a maker of shoes, and he was going door to door selling shoes in his next life. So when he came to the door of his previous family, they were simply, "We don't want any salesmen here. Get out of here." Right? So by his desires, he's living close to his family from his previous life and in the same village, but by his karma, he couldn't associate with them anymore. He was in a different position. So our understanding is that instead of having activities and desires that push us to take one body after another in this world, because if we look at our current life, I think all of us can say that our current life is not exactly perfect on a material level, isn't it? Right? Anybody look in the mirror and go, "Wow, that's the perfect body"? Or any of us look at our personality and say, "Wow, I have the perfect personality"? Or would any of us just dump all the contents of our mind for the public to view? I don't think so. Or whatever family, if we had I had a wonderful family, but it wasn't perfect. It had its problems. I would like to change this thing or that thing, isn't it? Right? So instead of having material desires that are just going to get us into another imperfect life, and again we'll think, "Oh, well, let me have this kind of life. Let me have this kind of life." Somebody's thinking, "Well, let me be another species, or let me be another this, or let me be another that." Instead of that, what we want to do is not take another material body at all, and we want to revive our original spiritual body. We want to enter into the pastimes of the eternal pastimes of the Lord in a spiritual body. So in order to do that, we don't want to cultivate karma at all. We want to cultivate spiritual activities, what Krishna calls akarma. And we want to cultivate spiritual desires. So great personalities like Madhavendra Puri, they give us a template for that. Because one could say, "Oh, everybody should be spiritual." But what does that mean? What does that look like? So Madhavendra Puri is giving this exemplary life of how to have fully spiritual activities and then how to remember Krishna at the time of death. And he's doing this through intense emotions, and it's particularly intense emotions of separation from Krishna. Now, it's also very telling the difference between Madhavendra Puri and his two disciples, Ramachandra Puri and Ishwar Puri. So Ramachandra Puri made a very fascinating mistake. He was thinking that spiritual emotions are material emotions. So if a person is dying and they're thinking, "My dog, I'm not going to see my dog again," then they'll probably take birth as a dog. Or if they're thinking, "Oh, my wife, what will happen to my wife?" and they'll take birth as a woman, or they'll take birth again in association with that soul who was their wife. If they're thinking, "Oh, my husband, my son," they take birth as a man, or they take birth again in association with that husband or that son. Or "my country," and they take birth again in that country. So when Madhavendra Puri was crying, "Where's Mathura? Where's the Lord of Mathura? Where's my Lord?" And Ramachandra Puri is thinking, "You're a fool. You're lamenting." And he saw Madhavendra Puri's lamentation as if it was an ordinary lamentation. And he was saying, "Brahmabhuta prasanatmana sochatina kanchati." If you're actually situated in Brahman, if you're actually situated in transcendence, you don't have any attraction or aversion for anything in this world. You don't lament for anything in this world. I mean, Prabhupada writes this heavy purport in 620 of Bhagavad Gita, that one is unaffected by the death of a near relative. One is unaffected by some serious disease or accident or the calamities in this world. Accidents, disease, death, war, that one is not emotionally invested in these things, because any emotional investment in these things brings us back to another body. And so those who have, in the Brahman conception, One is just neutral. Prabhupada even uses the word callous. One is just neutral to this material attachment and aversion, this coming and going. And of course, this concept is there throughout the scripture. One is not affected by material happiness and distress and heat and cold and honor and dishonor, fame and infamy, which is almost impossible for an ordinary person. I mean, it's possible when everything's going well, right? Like I remember when I first read Bhagavad Gita when I was in college, and I thought, oh yeah, I'm like that. I'm not affected by anything. And then I remember what happened. Something happened, and I was very affected, and I'm like, oops. Right, so here Ramchandra Puri is thinking, I have to help my guru when he's leaving. And I have to tell him, don't be emotional. Don't be lamenting for something, because then he'll just take another material body. But he didn't understand that above Brahman realization, above the freedom from attachment and aversion in this world, is spiritual attachment. Our great teacher, our great Acharya, Rupa Goswami, explains in depth in his book, Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, which Prabhupada translated as Nectar Devotion, that for each type of relationship with the Lord, there's feelings of meeting and separation. And he goes into great detail. What are the different flavors of meeting and separation with the Lord according to one's relationship? And as the author of Chaitanya Charitamrita, which I was reading, Krishnadas Kaviraj, as he states, that one's fortunate just to hear of this feeling of separation of Madhavendra Puri. And this is the main way, ironically, that we cultivate a sense of being with the Lord. If we want to feel the presence of God, there's a very famous Christian book, Being in the Presence of God, by, I think, Friar Lawrence, always to feel the presence of the Lord. And seemingly contradictory, the way to always feel the presence of the Lord is to always feel I'm separated from him and I want him. And we can have some idea of this in a material example. I have a good friend who had she had never married, and she'd never been in any kind of relationship with a man except one time when she was raped. And from that rape came a daughter. So she raised this daughter with great love and affection in Krishna consciousness. And the daughter became very ill, I think with Lyme disease. And at a very, very young age, in her 20s, she died, leaving behind a husband and a son. And this friend of mine had a really, really long grieving process for the passing of her daughter. I mean, years, 4 or 5 years later, she was just, consumed with grief to the point that it even affected her own health. And it's interesting because she's a mental health counselor, but she just wasn't able to process this grief. And in constantly thinking about her deceased daughter, it was almost as if she was with her. In one sense, she was more with her daughter than when her daughter had been alive, living in another state. Does that make sense to everybody? So when her daughter was alive and living at a distance from her, I'm sure she thought about her daughter, but not every minute of every day. Oh, my adult daughter, she's there. But once her daughter had passed and she was feeling this it consumed her to the point that she was absorbed in thoughts of her daughter constantly. Now, materially, that's actually not healthy. In fact, it wasn't even physiologically healthy for her. But spiritually, that's the way that we should be absorbed in the Lord. Most people's absorption in the Lord is a piece of their life, isn't it? I mean, the vast majority of people you meet who say they love God or they believe in God, it's very theoretical. Like, do you believe in God? Oh, yes, I believe in God. But maybe they go to a place of worship like, for Christmas and Easter or something like that. Very rarely are they actually doing anything in connection with the Lord. And then the people who are what we would call devout, maybe they go to church once a week, or maybe even they go every day. But it tends to be a slice of their life, like here's my God slice, and here's my family slice, and here's my work slice, and here's my entertainment slice, and my hobby slice. Yes, isn't it like that for most people? God is a piece of my life. But what we want is total absorption. Now, what's interesting, when we're totally absorbed in the Supreme, then we naturally achieve nasochati nakanchati. It's quite interesting. When we're totally absorbed in the emotions of the spiritual world, we naturally become detached from the emotions of the material world. Now, we could say we cultivate freedom from attachment and aversion as part of our process, that we cultivate it as a discipline. That could be said because it's one of the angas of bhakti, not to be affected by jubilation and lamentation in the material world. So it is a deliberate thing that we cultivate, but it is also a natural effect. As I was just reading, Rupa Goswami said, that one becomes accustomed to drinking spiritual nectar, they lose all interest in sugar. Just like it's very easy to get people to give up eating meat, fish, and eggs when you give them Krishna Prasadam, isn't it? It just becomes extremely easy. You have param dristva nivartite, you have a higher taste. And we are emotional beings. The spirit means emotion. You know, this microphone has no emotion. If I say, now I'm going to turn you off, it doesn't say, please, I don't want to be turned off. It doesn't care. It has no desires. It has no feelings. Descartes said, I think, therefore I am. But frankly, you can teach a machine to think. You can teach a machine to outplay a chess player, which means it can think quite well. But what it can't do is care. If the machine wins the chess match, it doesn't care. It doesn't celebrate. And if it loses, it doesn't care. So what really is I am is that I have feelings, I have desires, I have emotions. And Rupa Goswami describes all this range of emotion, 33 Ravichari bhavs, transitory emotions, and then 7 sthai bhavs, constitutional emotions, that are there in spiritual life. And there are feelings even that appear very negative, like fear and anger. Here we find Madhavendra Puri gets very angry at his disciple, who tells him, just be materially attached. But those spiritual emotions are all full of sweetness. I always give the example, there's different flavors of ice cream. So the different flavors. And when one is tasting the spiritual emotions, the material emotions are revealed for what they are. They're just biochemicals. They're just in the body. They're not meat. They're just responses of the brain and the body to various stimulus. They're not really coming from the soul. And they appear just as uninteresting. That one isn't averse to the material emotions, but it's just flat. Just, oh, okay, there's anger going through the brain and the body, there's lust going through, there's greed, there's envy, there's joy, there's peace, whatever, as Krishna says, right? One who does not hate illumination, attachment, and delusion when they appear, nor long for them when they disappear, knowing that the modes alone are active. One who is always steady and neutral to the material. But why? Not because one is just situated in Brahman, but because one is tasting the spiritual emotions. And one of the techniques, Prabhupada said we should teach techniques of spiritual life. One spiritual technique that I have taught to a lot of people in dealing with material emotions that they can't process properly, especially negative emotions, are to meditate on some spiritual reality where the reality of those emotions are present. Again, in my current Bhagavatam reading, I'm at the beginning of the 10th canto, and I was just reading how in Krishna's appearance, Rohini Devi was feeling great separation from her husband, Vasudeva, that Rohini was apart from Vasudeva because of the political situation. Just like now there's a war in Ukraine, and so many women and children are leaving the country and their husbands are still in the country fighting. Right? So this happens, right? When there's a war, when there's a demoniac government, husbands and wives become separated. So Vasudeva and Rohini had become separated because the evil ruler Kamsa was persecuting everyone, and she was raising her child Balaram apart from her husband. And then it was time to celebrate the appearance of Krishna, the birth appearance of Krishna. And although she was feeling great separation from her husband, she was in a celebratory mood for Krishna's appearance, and she dressed herself very nicely. And similarly, when Krishna's foster father Nandamaj went to Mathura to pay his taxes to this evil king, and he saw Krishna's real father, Vasudeva, and Balaram's father, Vasudeva. And Vasudeva was expressing he couldn't express his separation from Krishna, but he was expressing his separation from Balaram. And of course, he was also feeling separation from his wife, Rohini. So some time ago, I was talking with a devotee who circumstantially was separated from her husband, and she was grieving, when will I see my husband? I said, why don't we meditate on Vasudeva and Rohini and how they were feeling? And so we went deep into meditation on how was Rohini feeling, raising Balaram in Vrindavan without being able to share that with her husband. And how was Vasudeva feeling, separated from Balaram, separated from Rohini? We wrote actually some poetry on that. And as we went deeper and deeper into the feelings of Vasudeva and Rohini, then all of the material feelings about, am I with my husband, dissipated. Because the spiritual feelings are real. The spiritual feelings are satisfying, and they are the archetype of which the material feelings are simply some reflection. So Madhavendra Puri was absorbed in these spiritual feelings of separation. And this is what, again, it makes us feel in the presence of God, and it's very satisfying, although it may appear to an observer, even an observer who's in spiritual life, like Ramachandra Puri, it may appear to be something of the material world. So let's read through some of these purports. We've already talked about. All right, this is the purport for text 22. The translation is, hearing this instruction where Ramachandra Puri had said, just stop hankering and lamenting and be absorbed in Brahman. Madhavendra Puri, greatly angry, rebuked him by saying, get out, you sinful rascal. Srila Prabhupada's purport. Ramachandra Puri could not understand that his spiritual master, Madhavendra Puri, was feeling transcendental separation. His lamentation was not material. Rather, it proceeded from the highest stage of ecstatic love of Krishna. When he was crying in separation, I could not achieve Krishna, I could not reach Mathura. This was not ordinary material lamentation. Ramachandra Puri was not sufficiently expert to understand the feelings of Madhavendra Puri, but nevertheless he thought himself very advanced. Therefore, regarding Madhavendra Puri's expressions as ordinary material lamentation, he advised him to remember Brahman because he was latently an impersonalist. Madhavendra Puri understood Ramachandra Puri's position as a great fool and therefore immediately rebuked him. Such a reprimand from the spiritual master is certainly for the betterment of the disciple. So it may appear, as when we were reading through all the verses, that Madhavendra Puri was condemning Ramachandra Puri and benedicting Ishwara Puri, but actually he was trying to benedict both. Now the problem here is that Ramachandra Puri did not take this rebuking properly. One of the reasons that one should accept a spiritual master is to have somebody who can rebuke you. That's part of the reasons. Like, let's say you want to learn how to play tennis, and you hire a tennis coach. You pay them something. What are you paying them for? You're paying them to correct you, isn't it? Isn't that a fact? You want them to both praise you and correct you. You want them to say, yeah, that was a good swing, and no, that, hey, put your elbow out a little more this way. And if the coach says to you, that's a terrible swing, and you respond by throwing down your racket and walking off in a huff, then what is the point? Now, of course, the problem here with spiritual life is what the guru is rebuking the disciple for is things like their motives and their character, not just how they're holding their arm. And none of us like to be told that there's something wrong with our motives and our character. We tend to believe that even though we may make mistakes physically, that our inner drive, our inner motivation, and our inner character is benevolent. And this extends even to severe criminals. I remember reading a story about this man who had been a serial killer. What was his name? They called him BTK, I think, bind, torture, kill, because that's what he did to his victims. And when it was revealed, you know, sometimes with these terrible serial killers, the family has no idea. Like the family just thinks they're an ordinary person. Yes? So when it was revealed, and he was convicted and he's in jail, so he's writing letters to his daughter. And the article I read was written by the daughter. Like, how could she deal with this man that she thought was a loving father, and turns out that he's this horrific, torturing serial killer? And she said that in one of his letters, he said, yes, it's true, I have made some mistakes in my life. So it really struck me that even somebody who we would say epitomizes evil, you know, you're getting pleasure from picking off random strangers, tying them up, torturing them, and killing them. I mean, like, that's kind of you're the poster child of evil motives. And you don't think you have evil motives. He was saying, well, actually, I'm a good person. I'm really a good, loving person. I've just made some mistakes. And I thought, if that kind of cognitive dissonance can be there even in such a person, it's not surprising it can be there in most of us. That we just don't see that there's something wrong with our inner motives. And it's the thing that we put up the strongest defense against. Someone saying, hey, you actually have envy, you actually have pride, you actually have greed, you actually have malice. We're like, no, I'm a good person. And we're terrified that if we see these things in ourselves, that we'll just become depressed. You know, or suicidal even, that we won't be able to go on, so we don't want to see these things. But without seeing these things, we can't get rid of them. Isn't it a fact? Right? I have an office chair that has, in the back, it has mesh on one side, and the other side it has kind of bars, and there's an opening between the mesh and the bars. And the bars they're kind of curved so that there's an inner curved surface. And just a few days ago, I noticed, I've had that chair now a year and a half, I noticed that dust had collected in this inner surface, which is basically, it's not visible. There's practically no angle from which you can see it. Somehow by touching it, I got as much dust on my hand as you would pull from the lint filter of a dryer. And the inside of each of these bars was covered with about 1/4 of an inch to 1/2 an inch of this dust. Cleaning it was very difficult, and it was really, and whoever designed this chair has never cleaned anything in their life, and you're just like trying to get in there to clean out the dust. But I didn't see it. My point is, I didn't see it. All the time I was using the chair, I cleaned the chair at least once a week, and I clean all what I thought I was cleaning, all the surfaces of the chair at least once a week, and I looked at it and said, I am a very clean person. Yes, Urmila is so clean. But there was a whole bunch of gunk that I didn't see. And when I was finally cleaning it, it made kind of a mess. So the Lord and the spiritual master, they say, you may look like you're all right. Ramachandra Puri thought he was fine. He thought, I'm a very spiritual person. Prabhupada said here he was a latent impersonalist. He didn't realize that he had this contamination. He didn't see it as a contamination. This is also a problem we do with our difficulties. We think our difficulties are wonderful things. And so the Guru and the scriptures and the Lord say, nope. Now, unfortunately, Ramachandra Puri doesn't respond very well to this rebuke of his Guru. He doesn't respond with humility. He doesn't respond with a desire to change. And so he becomes more and more offensive. He's thrown out, and he ends up offending God directly as Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, which is, of course, a whole other story. And he offends all the devotees, and he actually loses his spiritual life while he thinks he's very, very spiritual. So we have this one lesson of how to die, how to live our life and how to die, how to cultivate the spiritual emotions. And then from this pastime, we also have this lesson on how to receive correction, how to receive correction with humility. Because you know what? When you get the dust out of the chair, the air is going to be cleaner and you're going to breathe better, right? When we get the gunk out of our heart, when we take out these things which are not really us, we're pure spirit soul. These bad qualities we have, this bad character we have, these bad motivations, they're not really us. They're things we have taken by material association. We don't need to become depressed about it. We can become happy that somebody's pointed out, hey, you've got dust you couldn't see. Hey, this thing is really dirty. You know, we even become offended if someone tells us there's dirt in our house we couldn't see, for God's sake. What to speak of dirt in our heart? Thank you. Oh, now that it's gone, now I can function better. Now I can be happy. And we in spiritual life, we have experienced that when we receive this kind of correction, although at first there's a little sting to the false ego, that when we actually accept it, and we actually say, oh, what is this? I don't want this thing. It's not the real me. It's not the soul. Yes, I will let go of this. Whatever it costs, I will let go of this. That then Krishna removes it. Shinvatam swakata Krishna punya shravanam kirtanam vidyatasta badrani vijunoti saritsata. That Krishna removes it. And then, instead of feeling depressed, we feel joyful. We feel relieved. We feel cleansed, and we feel happy. So I think we have like 2 minutes, or we have no minutes. Sorry that I went long, and there was so much in this pastime that we could have gone into. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Maybe, Mars, you're going to talk about this more tonight?